for anyone knowing what this, trying to understand what the session is, this is basically going to be a Q&A with our technical steering committee, our TSC for short. The technical steering committee, as taken from their GitHub bio, is basically the group of people who set the technical as well as the product direction for the AMP project, and the execution happens in the working group. So if we could quickly go around and have everyone introduce themselves, that'd be great.
You want to call on people?
Okay, sure. I'll call in the order I can see them on my screen in that case. Rudy.
Hey, I'm Rudy Galfi. I'm a product manager at Google.
Malta.
I'm Malta. I'm a software engineer at Google.
Dima. This is fun.
Dima, I'm a software engineer at Google.
Cassiana.
Hi, I am the newest TSC member. I'm a product manager at Axios.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm a software engineer at Pinterest.
Paul.
Hello, Paul Armstrong. I'm a software engineer at Twitter.
And then David, followed by Salo.
I'm David. I'm CTO and an engineer at Pantheon, a content management platform.
Hi there, I'm Salo, engineer manager at Microsoft.
Is there anyone who has not turned their camera on and hence I do not know right now? Perfect.
Got everyone.
Yay, score. Good. To get things started, since Cassiana, you mentioned you're the newest member, I just wanted for you to share like what you're excited about with regards to joining the TSC and about the project in general.
Yeah, so I work on Axios's website. We recently rebuilt it from the ground up. We launched in February, and we are basically all AMP. Some of our marketing pages are not AMP, but everything else is. All of the sort of core product is. And so that was a really important decision for us. And you know, as a result of that, I've become a pretty big fan of AMP. I think as a product manager, I really like. On some level, I like the constraints that AMP provides. I think it makes it easier to be very user-first and user-centric and to create a really fast, optimized, clean experience. So that's kind of why I'm excited about the project. I also think that it can be a really great tool for publishers, and I'm excited to help publishers, you know, I mean, obviously that is the point, but I am the lone publisher representative on the TSC, and I'm really excited to help publishers understand the ways that AMP can help them meeting both their sort of user goals and also their distribution goals. So that's why I'm here. You are muted.
Yes, I am. Given I'm started off with like working with publishers, it's interesting that it took this long to have a publisher on board. But yeah, welcome. This is exciting.
I'm sure that I know that they're very involved in the other parts of the AMP project. I think it's just yeah, having somebody who's jazzed to be on the TSC part.
Yeah, this will be exciting. Like Joey mentioned on the chat, if you have any questions for this group of people, ask the chat, raise your hand, which I hear is a Zoom feature, or just like unmute yourself and you can ask as well. But I'll get folks started if no one has a seed question right now. We heard at Malta's keynote, both during the main summit as well as earlier today, that we have something called Core Web Vitals and page experience that is now a part of a web developer's journey. So as the technical steering committee, how are you thinking about AMP in this new world with Core Web Vitals and page experience?
I can maybe lead off there. So I think for me, what's really exciting about the Core Web Vitals initiative, which is something that the Chrome team at Google kind of came out with, I guess, yeah, early last month, is it continues to kind of work toward providing more focus in what the developer journey should look like when it comes to optimizing for user experience and performance on the web. And so I think in some respects, these metrics are just kind of evolutions of kind of properties like loading time that have always been, I think, sort of being analyzed. But then there's kind of new elements like content shift or sort of just making sure that the page isn't sort of like locking up on you as you're looking to engage with it. And so I think that these, like highlighting these metrics and putting them forward really helps drive a lot of clarity to sort of what should be optimized when it comes to a good user experience. Like when you look across like a lot of the different aspects that'll be relevant to a lot of different kinds of sites and a lot of users across the web. I'm actually also excited about like what could happen with the program in the future in terms of, you know, thinking about other aspects of user experience that are important, and like really providing metrics that can be collected from real user interactions to provide insight into how to improve those areas as well. So this could be things like privacy or accessibility or things like that. And so I think it's a starting point, but I think it lays a very nice foundation for focus and really like setting out what's important. And then alongside that, and sort of speaking more from a Google point of view, because obviously I was involved with bringing some of this out, I think what's also great is that there's a really nice cohesive story around tooling. So whether it's using things like Lighthouse, or whether it's like going to the Google Search Console to kind of get like a site-wide view, or even be able to use some of the APIs that are available. I think alongside the guidance, developers also have a lot of tools at their fingertips to be able to gain the insights about how their experiences are measuring along these different dimensions, and being able to hopefully act on it as well.
Yeah, I'd echo what Rudy said. I mean, I'm sort of on the other side of things, but there's a lot of, you know, the core Web Vitals really helps with clarity, and on our teams that work on performance or trying to think about growth and SEO and all that stuff, having something that's less of a moving target and real clear about what we're trying to achieve from a performance really helps us work together.
I also like that, you know, when we talk to, say, web spec platforms and different working groups, this also brings clarity, because we can go in and say, you know what, aspect ratio CSS is critical for instance, content layout shift metric, and you need to prioritize it instead of, you know, debating like maybe some very small minutiae of, you know, some of these projects. I can definitely see how they could start moving pretty well. It's basically gives sort of a priority to the web.
I think there's also some question in a sense of what role AMP has in this future, where it's not specifically a requirement to meet these standards, but it's a framework optimized around that. And I think that actually puts AMP in a great position to be the brightest lit path to actually achieving these goals. Many of these optimizations can conflict with each other as you pursue them, and AMP provides a coherent, cohesive approach to optimizing across the spectrum of metrics in a way that is extraordinarily challenging to do from scratch with disparate components and frameworks.
Anyone else? If not, Juan has a question. He's an AMP contributor from Utah, and he wants to hear the goss on the transition of joining OpenJS as a growth project. So how's the transition going? What does actually being out of incubation mean? And then, yeah, has the code transferred to the foundation now? Basically, he wants all the details.
I'll start, and maybe not sure if like at some point there's Toby or Joey can even go like deeper into the process details, since they actually did the work. So there is a very significant difference between being in incubation and being actually a member of the foundation. So the one means basically, I mean, from a legal point of view, basically incubation means absolutely nothing. And from a legal point of view, being a member of the foundation means everything. So the copyright owner of AMP is the foundation, and actually after this morning, I literally signed the papers on behalf of Google LLC. Robin had already signed it, that the AMP trademark was transitioned to the foundation. And so, I mean, many of these things are really legal and like have relatively little meaning in practice. I think for an Apache license project, there's no, like, for a consumer point of view, this actually makes no difference. But yeah, basically, like, if, for example, like the foundation had any, like, for example, the one thing they could do is they could get rid of the TSC. It's like, for example, like, as an extreme thing, right? Like, then they obviously couldn't have done that before. Like, they could change, and so that's, all these obviously things that wouldn't happen. But like, from like the foundation is now literally the owner and leader delegated to the CSC, like, of this project. And I think that's a pretty big difference. One of the core steps, and we've also, the TSC has spent a lot of this. I don't think we've made the switch, but one of the big significant differences is going to be how the CLA is going to work. So up until now, when you committed to the repo, you always like signed the CLA, which kind of assigned the copyright of your work to Google. I think that's the right way to put it, but maybe like roughly correct. And so that's going to change also, obviously, to the foundation.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably the biggest change that most people will notice is the CLA. So instead of signing a CLA with Google, a contributor license agreement with Google, it would be with the OpenJS Foundation. And it's funny, like, I thought that this would be a very small thing, like, it's just changing some text from Google to this other. But it turns out there's a lot of debates around CLA versus DCO, which is another form of this. And so if you look through some of the issues that are in the meta, I think in the meta repo around tracking some of this move to the foundation, there's some discussion there about what the CLA will look like. I think we ended up in a really good spot, though, that it will actually be easy for most people to move forward with contributing.
I think in terms of TSC and discussions that we had in terms of moving to OpenJS, is that was our biggest pain point in figuring out what the best thing to do for contributors would be, and the contributors and the project long term. And as Joey said, I think we got to a good spot, or we're getting to it. So I'm pretty excited about where we ended up.
Push the other and pull this one.
One of the things that I've liked in terms of our process for joining OpenJS is that we've had the opportunity to both have AMP improved through for its contributor process through joining OpenJS, as well as working on our own contributions to that other OpenJS projects can pick up in terms of some of the stuff around CLAs. We're working on improving the standards around how that process works, basically to lower the barrier to entry for contributing to projects.
Yeah. By the way, I think one thing for folks, because it's really interesting, the main difference in the CLA process is that the solution that we have now is actually bound to GitHub identity. And that should make this much less frustrating in that you can know that your PR is covered. For previously, the Google process is bound to the email addresses that are used to sign commits, which are completely unrelated to your GitHub pull request identity. And so this always led to these edge cases where it was really difficult to get a pull request in a good state. And I mean, obviously, knock on wood, but that new process might have other problems, but it definitely should not have this problem.
So David actually brought this up, that there's more chance for collaboration between, for us to learn from other OpenJS projects and such. What's potentially one OpenJS project you're excited to work with?
I'm not sure if this is being asked directly to me or to everyone, but
Generally.
I have an enormous amount of respect for a lot of the people in leadership positions on OpenJS projects, and I can't even begin to speculate how much opportunity we have to grow through learning from working with those projects in terms of working with larger sets of contributors. My own background is with Drupal and among other open source projects, and it just really provides an enormous amount of momentum just being part of a community, because often barriers to entry in projects can be social as much as technical. And by being part of OpenJS, it means that we are part of a community where transitioning from contributing to one project within that community to another probably has a lower barrier to entry than, say, contributing to AMP before this transition.
Anyone else? And speaking of forward-looking things, what are you excited about for the AMP project to work on? Some crazy idea, something out there in 2021 or like even further down the line?
I know one of the things that we could probably stand to grease the wheels a lot on, that is an important technology for AMP, are signed exchanges, in terms of how those documents get generated, signed, delivered, how that infrastructure works both in the AMP ecosystem and external to AMP in terms of, say, non-AMP pages that also want to be delivered through signed exchanges. This setup process is a bit complicated right now. And one of the barriers to entry has always been that there is one certificate authority that was issuing the compliance certificates. And one thing that I'm excited about is seeing the evolution of that ecosystem and having those doors opened up a bit more for developers to, say, self-provision the infrastructure, to have better documentation around it, better implementations around it that make it easier for people to deliver. And because I think it's a really clever way to both deliver documents a different way and even augment existing security infrastructure on the web in terms of validating document integrity.
Yeah, plus one to signed exchange. We've had a couple of stumbling blocks at Pinterest trying to get started on this, but we definitely continue to have conversations and really looking forward to thinking about that.
It's also an important part of the story of making AMP sort of not special, but just a brightly lit path, in the sense of taking a lot of the technologies and approaches that accelerate AMP pages, not exactly the same approaches, but delivering many of the same benefits and delivering them in a way that is not exclusive to AMP.
A similar way, I'm also pretty excited about ramping up some of the bento work we've been doing. I kind of can already imagine that there will be some things we can collaborate with the web community to improve component library distribution and things like this, to make components fully functional in any application, AMP or non-AMP.
Yeah, I was going to talk about bento AMP as well. I'm very excited about having that and having that push components, not only like the AMP components, but like push the limits in the web standards and trying to get those web components to a better state. I think AMP is going to help with that. But I'm very excited to have bento AMP so that more developers can plug and play like with more AMP components. That's very exciting.
Another question that we have from Juan is, I remember that in 2018, there was this initiative to grab some of the learnings from AMP and to include them as part of the wider web standards. An update, I know that page experience is one of them, but do you folks want to share an update about how you're thinking about that going forward, or even where we've gotten to so far?
Yeah, I'll take this. I mean, there has been, like, I actually posted an update 1 year ago. So if you want to read up on that, and definitely the page experience work is kind of the first like user visible step. Because I mean, there's the standardization side and then there's the side of using it. So definitely those like the investment in those metrics like was very related to this effort kicking off and kind of trying to think of like how can we measure what makes AMP fast in a way that's not related to the technology. We already talked about sign exchanges. There on the Google side is definitely a lot of investment in terms of supporting sign exchanges for a non-AMP document. Like there's nothing to announce, but it's also extremely imminent of being available. And one big piece of technology that we spent a lot of time on was portals. And so we definitely, like for quite a while, we are hoping to use them for implementing kind of the user experience that the top stories carousel in Google search provides today based on AMP. We then made the decision to drop that because we didn't see portals get wide enough adoption. And so this is a really like complicated field, but basically there's features that like where portals are really exciting, where every time a site adopts, you can use it, and that's great, basically progressive enhancement, versus having a feature that kind of relies on everyone adopting before this really works. And we didn't feel like this was certainly with COVID and everything, was the right time to like do such a heavy push. And so we kind of took it out of the consideration there. That doesn't mean, however, that the Chrome team, especially the Chrome team and other browser vendors, are continuing to work on it. And so like this is definitely something that will be very useful to use once it's out. I'm also very excited about the same origin applications of the technology. So basically it allows you to build something that kind of feels like a single page app with multi-page apps. So you get rid of all the complexity of memory leaks suddenly being a problem and so forth. But you get much of the benefits. So that's, I think those are the major fields. The last field that we definitely always tracked was feature policies. I think feature policies are both, in a way, a disappointment, and we then realize what they're actually for. So much of the standardization efforts around AMP kind of started with saying, like, can we kind of go and constrain documents so that they can execute as fast as AMP. And I think the realization is that this is besides some like very obvious ways, it's very difficult to constrain at this very generic layer such that something that's what's left over still allows you to do anything. But on the other hand, basically, the mechanism is here to stay. For many, like it allows you to turn off super backward compatibility legacy features that allow the browser to be faster that no one wants anyway, but we kind of carry around. And so they're really useful, but they definitely don't play like a major role in this whole effort. It's more like a stepping stone these days.
I also wanted to mention a couple of things in the area of web specs that we are actively collaborating with our web community. Things like aspect ratio CSS. I think we really gave it a strong push, and hopefully start seeing it soon on the web. In general, display locking is actively worked on spec with our collaboration. CSS isolation and CSS specificity updates also in the works. The one I'm particularly excited is also declarative Shadow DOM, where you can actually server-side render Shadow DOM and push it to client much faster. There is a whole host of those things that I think we're giving it, a lot of work, and we'll start seeing them very soon.
Anything else that anyone else wants to share? Esther asked a great question. Should AMP continue to support IE11? The million-dollar question.
No, but I think everyone also has to say probably yes.
I would like to
I shouldn't be saying that. I shouldn't be saying that, but no.
All right, decided.
we could have said no, but because there are definitely some markets that really heavily use IE 11 still. Like, I think last we heard South Korea was pretty heavily still using the IE 11.
Yeah, China is still also a big IE. So yeah, that's a funny topic. I laugh because we struggle a lot, even like at Microsoft, with like internally having to deal with a service like Bing. Like we have to support IE 11. Like it's it's our core business, and AMP is like, if I could choose, like I said, like I would just drop it, but I don't think we can.
There's also a tiered approach that we might consider, which is support as a lower tier than first tier going forward. That's something that we've worked on for quite a long time, in the sense that like it can work. It may not work exactly the same, or layout might be a little bit off, but it is still usable, it is still readable, and people won't have any full like accessibility or usability issues. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a full support. So I tend to go with a yes and no answer.
And Kevin Kimball just mentioned that, yeah, it is worth mentioning, like the work that the AMP Performance Working Group is doing in the ES module space will actually help a lot here with us being able to say yes and no, like Paul mentioned.
I mean, yeah, with that we basically get like, we don't pay the cost for everyone else, but it's still the cost of supporting it keeps the same. I was checking a few days ago what the global percentage of traffic is. The nice thing about it is it's like 1 point something as measured by statcounter.com. The nice thing is it's going down, and I think like really persistently. And so like when we have this conversation in a year, I think the answer will be different.
Yeah, the next few months, I think this percentage will go down even more. So we should revisit that.
Was that an announcement of you pushing Edge to Windows 7 users?
I don't know about that. I know nothing about that. So.
I appreciate the effort to get gossip here. We have like a minute or so left, but Caroline asked a question that since Malta mentioned COVID-19, what are some of the ways you see the web users' needs from the webs changing in context of COVID, and how do you think AMP can help here?
Well, one thing that I've been hearing from the publishing community in terms of the change in their business is that advertising has sort of collapsed and that they become very reliant on subscriptions. So the ability to manage your subscriptions and be able to subscribe to content and have your subscription content be available through AMP probably will continue to be important, and is probably at least as important now as it ever has been.
Anyone else? Any last thoughts before we hand it over to Patrick for his talk?
I guess the other last thing I would add is that a lot of organizations that deliver news are seeing unprecedented spikes in traffic as well. And insofar as they're able to shovel a lot of that burden for those first clicks and those articles that have, say, gone viral, the AMP infrastructure can be really helpful to ensuring that they don't have that load concentrate on their origin servers.
This just on this note from the publisher side, I think what David is saying is absolutely true. Our advertising is different than most, so I don't think we've had that same issue, but we have seen traffic really spike. I think for us, the other emphasis is also around conversion and introducing people who come in on a website or a page for a story to the other kinds of products that we have. For us in particular, it's our newsletter products. And so I think that's going to be a bigger focus for us moving forward, is trying to figure out what are the ways that you can benefit from this like traffic deluge that is not purely advertising based.